No one ever told me that a peaceful airport lounge would end up shattering my whole family-oriented worldview. Hi, I'm Mia Hayes, and I spent the better part of my childhood playing the role of the model daughter, quiet, submissive, and obedient. On that particular day, however, I observed my father stoop down, slap Grandpa on the shoulder, and announce, "Just sit here. We'll go check in and return right away." We were meant to be traveling to South Africa for a family vacation. They got up and left, at peace. Of course, however, something seemed off. Some time elapsed. 20 more, next 30. It dawned on me at that moment. No way were they going back. There he was, abandoned in the middle of the terminal. My weak, bewildered grandfather, already slipping into the fog of Alzheimer's. I was careless. Run, I did. What I witnessed upon his arrival altered my entire understanding of home, loyalty, and love. As a child living in Omaha, Nebraska, everything appeared to be going swimmingly. White shutters adorn a 2-story house, grass cut just now. Doctor, my father, as a renowned cardiologist, Daniel Hayes valued clean clothes and a peaceful home life above all else. Patricia, my mum, stayed home, but she didn't do any nurturing. She reminded you gently that presentation is crucial, baked for school galas, and held fundraisers. As the eldest child, I was expected to shoulder the burden of responsibility. The honor student's bed was adorned with ribbons from piano competitions, her hair neatly coiffed, and her academic achievements displayed like badges of valor. We were all beaming in every family photo. However, no one ever paid attention to the way I habitually crossed my hands excessively. As if getting ready for something, no one ever said a word of love in our home. It was quantitative. Upon completion, amidst the stillness, to the extent that you participated. However, William, Grandpa, he was unique. You don't have to earn love, Elena. He was the only one who ever said that to me. Simply exist. As a kid, he would accompany me to the park every Sunday while my parents were at their social club, under the elm tree beside the lake. We would read books and feed the ducks. He used the exclusive moniker Laney to refer to me, as Dad patiently turned the pages of The Wind in the Willows for me. I can still see the scars on his hands from his years of teaching. Shop in high school. Fewer and fewer people stopped by as I aged. I heard from Dad that Grandpa was slowing down and ... confused. Those Sundays eventually came to an end. The guest room on the second floor was his new home. Not visible, moved aside. However, there were occasions when I would slip up there, most notably during high school finals, when the pressure to be flawless felt like smothering. Grades were never brought up by Grandpa. He only asked, "Tell me something beautiful you saw today," with a simple smile. Also, I never lacked for anything. Even the minutiae slipped his mind, no matter how many larger ones he began to lose track of. Initially, it posed no threat, making the same name-dropping gesture 3 times in a row, as if taken aback that I was still present. Then he'd start rehashing old tales as if they were brand new, unable to move on. Eventually, my dad became irritated. Even though he was still in the room, my mum began referring to him in the past tense. However, he remained Grandpa to me, the man who instilled in me the ability to perceive more than just the weather in the sky. For that reason, I wanted to trust Dad when he stated we were all going on a vacation together to create memories before things got worse. Regardless of the fact that a voice within me moaned, "No one ever makes a lasting impression by abandoning a loved one." Prior to the onset of forgetfulness, Grandpa possessed unparalleled memorization abilities. Even though I despised chocolate milk, he recalled that I adore strawberry milk. He recalled my favorite books, my uneasy hum, and the fact that, despite my mum's protests, my middle name was actually inspired by his mother and not mine. I was always on his mind. His sense of time and place started to deteriorate with the onset of Alzheimer's disease, yet he still looked at me as if I were home, even if he confused names and dates. I was 16 years old when he first lost track of his location. He was standing in his slippers, holding a watering can, when I discovered him in the driveway. February has arrived. There is snow all over. In his mind, he was in Alabama, helping Grandma with her rose garden just before she passed away. I held his hand tenderly, and he blinked and asked, "Lane, am I dreaming?" Even much it hurt, I forced a grin. "No, Grandpa. What you're doing is merely recalling it was just a phase," my parents thought. The terms facility and nursing wing were murmured by them in the dead of night. But the idea of him being alone in a room full of strangers who have no idea that he gets nervous by humming old jazz standards, or that he usually stirs his tea 3 times before drinking it, is too much for me to take. Thus I took it upon myself to sit by his side in the evenings and recite stories from the books he had read to me in the past. The Enchanted Garden, The Mouse and the Man, An Enchanted Garden. Even though he had trouble following at times, there were moments when his eyes gleamed as if he had just unlocked a previously shut door. Such instances were unusual and priceless. Nevertheless, their occurrence decreased across time. We were enjoying a sunny afternoon in the backyard, shaded by the majestic maple tree. I was just out of high school. I had gotten lost in the midst of my parents' elaborate party with string lights and charcuterie boards. Champagne was not what I desired. Grandpa was my desire. That day, with his clearest expression in weeks, he stared me in the eyes and pleaded, "Lane, promise me you won't when they stop seeing me." I froze. You would inevitably cross my path. He put his hand on mine and nodded. At that point, you will be prepared. His meaning eluded me. At that time, no. However, those words lingered in my mind like a smoldering ember, just waiting to be released, anticipating the moment when I will require their recollection. And the day arrived, in the terminal. When I returned home after my first year of university, it seemed like ... divided up. The guest room that Grandpa had occupied was unexpectedly locked while he was there. For his own protection, according to Mum.Dad, he was in need of some shut-eye. However, I did note that the hallway was now unusually silent. The fact that they stopped inviting him to dinner downstairs, when they thought Grandpa didn't live with us anymore. They stopped correcting others. Like a faded snapshot left in the sun, he was slipping from the family's memories. In the means that were available to me, I resisted. Grandpa found letters I had left for him on his nightstand. I sneaked him some lemon cookies from a patisserie close to campus. I sat for hours by his side, even when he did nothing more than stare out the window and summon me by the name of his sister, who passed away, Rose. It wasn't his forgetfulness, though, that stung the most. They owned it. When my dad was on the phone one afternoon, I happened to overhear him. The lawyer did mention that she would need to co-sign, but as she is only a minor, we will take care of it. That person, specifically, he brought me up. I crept in on tiptoe and peered over the papers on the counter after he stepped out of the room. Medicinal instructions. Final preparations for an individual's estate. In addition to being ready for Grandpa's decline, they were also getting ready to take everything away from him. They were approached by me that night. "He still knows me," I murmured, my voice clenched as I read aloud to him. He continues to grin. When I burn toast, he still laughs. He remains present. While folding laundry, Mum remained engrossed. "You seem very sentimental, Alina. You've always had an unhealthy obsession." It was a heavy sigh from Dad. "Think love alone will suffice." "Actually, it's not. Doing the right thing is our priority." taking responsibility. That was it, meaning it's easy for you. I was shushed it after that. Then comes the chill. They stopped including me in any discussions on Grandpa's care after that. Over the weekend, I returned from campus to discover that his beloved tea kettle had been changed, his slippers had been discarded, and his books had been relocated. Mum gleefully proclaimed minimalism. This was like erasing a page from my memory. The announcement followed. During dinner one night, Dad announced that we were heading to South Africa, an all-inclusive family vacation, our final shared experience. Both his eyes and his smile were overly cautious. As I glanced over to Grandpa, I noticed that he was sitting serenely next to me, his fingers tapping an unseen beat on the table. I went in close and whispered, "You want to go on an adventure?" But he didn't appear to hear me. With a wink, he met my gaze. Oh, it was little. However, it was he. I decided to go on the trip, so I said yes. It wasn't because I bought into their story, but I had a feeling this wasn't your average vacation. There was an exam. Plus, I had to stay close in case they bombed it. As soon as it was light outside, we set out for the airport. Loading the car, we could still make out the sky's lingering orange hues and a slight aroma of dew and gasoline. Grandpa sported his beloved navy cardigan, which he affectionately referred to as his travel sweater, a garment he would often criticize for being buttoned wrong and having too long arms. He held onto my wrist with one hand and a framed picture of Grandma with the other. Dad incessantly checked the time. Mum appeared to be fixated on her reflection. To be sure Grandpa was still with us, I kept looking into his eyes. Whispering to Grandpa from the back seat, I asked, "Are you excited?" He remained silent. I did. Nothing more than hummed to myself while staring out the window. Perhaps an old military anthem. I thought I knew it. Possibly a lullaby. We exchanged firm squeezes. It's going to be warm somewhere. Recall the elephants. At that moment, he glanced in my direction and said, "You'll make a fine teacher one day, Rose." I refrained from yelling out his error. When he was afraid, he would always call me Rose. There were long queues, a cacophony of noise, and bright lights at the airport. My mum took me aside. "Alina, I need you to grab a strong coffee for your dad and myself." My gaze landed on Grandpa. Where does he stand? She reassured him that he's okay and started to leave. Our return is imminent, in the calmest section of the terminal's seating row. Next to a frosted glass overlooking the asphalt, Dad escorted Grandpa to a seat. With the photo of Grandma in his hand, Grandpa sat submissively. With a quiet and clear voice, my dad leaned over him and spoke. "Relax, we'll pop in for a quick check and be right back." A stone dropped into a well would reverberate in my mind. Like those words. With only a half-spoken request for coffee, I stood motionless. With poise and assurance, they strolled by my parents and made their way to the departure gate, never turning around. Also, a sensation emerged, wrong, until they vanished over the bend. I kept an eye on the rear of their heads. Half an hour elapsed. Next, 10. Uncle Grandpa remained seated, no word yet. His thumb remains pressed against the photo frame's edge. Duration, 15 minutes. I felt my heart racing. 20, please. A shiver went down my spine. I made my way to the automated kiosk for checking in. Sorry, has the Foster family already made their flight reservations? At the desk, a woman typed, "I have confirmed and cleared it." I gasped for air. "Are they all?" "Boarding should begin in about 20 minutes, she continued after giving a nod. Feeling cold, I withdrew. No way were they going back. They had absolutely no plans to return at all. Sitting alone among a sea of strangers, my granddad sat 100 feet distant. Nothing was making sense to him, and he had no idea where he was. Wait for us was all he knew from their words. He patiently waited. This is the behavior of loyal individuals. As I began to sprint through the throngs, my throat constricted. I always thought treachery would make a lot of noise. Knocked down doors, flew words. I learnt, though, that treachery is silent. It strolls away serenely, while you maintain your smile. The decision to run has slipped my mind. All I did was twitch, running back to the peaceful spot where Grandpa was sitting. I could hardly hear the boarding calls and the noise of luggage wheels. He remained seated in the identical chair. His shoulders slumped, and he peered over the audience like a kid whose father has forgotten about them. "Hi, Grandpa." I fell to my knees before him, gasping for air. "It is I, this is Alina." A mix of recognition and bewilderment flashed through his gaze. "You mean Rose?" He spoke in a low, dry voice. While holding his no-cold hands, I reassured him that it was all right. "Yes, I am here. You have company." Inconsolable, he glanced around. "What happened to your father?" "He promised to return immediately." "Where am I supposed to go, exactly?" My jaw clenched. "No. It is expected that you remain at my side. That's the end." Trembling, he held my hands even more tightly. Lainey, I was terrified. Two were at a loss as to what to do. Screaming was on my mind. Away from him. He once carried them on his shoulders, taught them how to fish, stayed up when they had nightmares, and paid for their first vehicles. But now these folks had simply packed their passports and printed boarding cards and were content to depart the man. Lifting him up with care, I rose to my feet. "Okay, Grandpa, come on. It's time for us to depart." As he peered along the terminal toward the gates, he paused. "Shall we not embark on an adventure?" Although it wasn't the one they had in mind, I did say yes as I slipped his scarf around his neck. I heard my name called out as we made our way to the exit. "Hi, Alina," I pivoted. Mom remained by the escalator, her phone still in her hand, her mascara streaked, and her heels clacking against the tile. Silent and rigid, her father stood behind her. "Alina, come back over here right now." My hold on Grandpa's hand became even more firm. He is completely confused about his whereabouts. With her voice rising, Mum snapped. "A medical expert must tend to him. This is completely out of your league." "Affirmative," I stated that I am fully aware of my actions. I refuse to abandon him like a bag left in a lobby. In a low, harsh voice, Dad finally spoke. "This is getting out of hand. Take a look at this, and what does it look like?" I let out a sharp chuckle. "That man is your dad." All movement came to a halt. The hum of the terminal pressed in for a brief while as we all stood in quiet. Next, I spoke it. "Your departure from him was tragic." I was quiet. None of that made me weep. It sounded like a verdict when I uttered it. No words escaped Mum's lips as they parted. I took a step back. "This is the end." "If you step away, Alina," Dad started. This, however, I did. I strolled, leaving the airport as the sun rises over the horizon. Both of us were barely encased in my coat. Even though Grandpa's hands were trembling, I helped him get into the first cab I saw. Like we continued our journey, the airport seemed to recede into the distance, like if it were a nightmare. I didn't let out a breath till we got to the bus station. "How far are we going?" Gentle and with hazy eyes, Grandpa asked. The contact I had saved weeks ago, the one I never imagined I'd use, came to light when I retrieved my phone and perused my messages. Harmon, June, the younger sister of my grandfather, another relative of mine. No one else in our family still included handwritten messages in birthday cards. A few months ago, she called me to express her concern about Grandpa. She resided on a tiny acreage in Kansas. "You can always call me if anything happens," she had told Elena. keep him from being taken. I contacted them. After the second ring, she picked up. Alina here, June, both Grandpa and I rely on you. She sounded terrified. Find out where you are. Please be patient. I purchased a pair of bus tickets for the subsequent journey. Very few people were using the station. I escorted Grandpa to a seat, encircled him in my scarf, and allowed him to put his head on my shoulder. Just as the engine started rumbling to life, he slept off. As the sun rose, we cycled through fields, past telephone poles, and through peaceful towns. Despite seeing the scenery shift, I never felt disoriented, at least not at the moment. Wherever we went, everyone would see us, an ideal place where we would truly be at home. I was breaking away from my parents' path for the very first time. It was my decision. Even though it was terrifying, that choice felt like returning home. Holton, Kansas's little station, was the destination of the bus. Shortly after midday, after the din of terminals and motors, the relative silence was almost oppressive, but I relished it nevertheless. On the platform stood a petite, strong-willed woman in a denim jacket. Her silver hair was pulled back, and she held a cardboard sign that said, William plus Alina, in a trembling black pen. Harmon, June. As soon as she noticed us, she lowered the sign. Billy. She cried out in shock as she hurried on. Grandpa stared in her direction before smiling with a degree of familiarity that surprised me. He spoke faintly, calling Junebug. Through her tears, she chuckled. Do you still recall that? His hand went out to grasp hers. Wow, you're getting on in years. She embraced him in a playful embrace that caused a tension in me to release. While teasing him that he hadn't, I released the breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for the first time in days. We traversed vast fields alongside two-lane roads. She lived in a small two-bedroom house on the outskirts of town. The paint was chipping, and the porch looked like it had been through a lot of stories over the years. No intake forms were filled out, and no one mentioned the weight of the situation. There was only hot soup, fresh linens, and the chilly silence I remembered from home, the type that encircles you like a quilt knot. As Grandpa dozed off inside that first night, I found myself seated on the porch. Sitting down next to me, June retrieved 2 cups of tea, her joints squeaking like an old rocking chair. Even if they don't recognize it now, especially if they don't, who did the right thing, she whispered. Even though I hadn't told her everything, I nodded nonetheless. In addition, she invited you to remain for as long as you required. In spite of its diminutive size, this cottage provides ample room for those who meet face to face. None of that made me weep. The stars were all I could do. They seemed to be staring back at me instead of through me, which was a first. I volunteered for grocery runs, cooking, and laundry over the following several weeks. Whenever the weather was pleasant, I would take Grandpa for leisurely strolls around the block. Even though he was unsure of our exact location, he never let go of my hand. He would refer to me as Rose sometimes, and Lainey other times. In those rare, short moments, he would meet my gaze with unclouded eyes and whisper, Elena. When I thought of those times, it was like finding a nugget of gold, proof that he was still there, hidden in the mist. When I got home from school or therapy, I began writing in my journal simply to keep track of everything. Things I didn't want to forget, like Grandpa's words or June's recipes, I jotted down. Reason being, forgetfulness wasn't only his concern this time, it was also mine. Furthermore, I had arrived to a location that let me to recall past events. By spring, I felt as comfortable as a bug in a rug, because to Holton's rhythmic pace of life. I used to get up before the sun came up, assist June whip up some oats, and then sit and watch Grandpa stir his spoon slowly, occasionally losing his train of thought. I would remind him gently, without getting angry or embarrassed. On his better days, he would hum softly as he dined. On occasion, he may even spill the beans about an unfinished tale he had with his brothers while fishing, or about the time he concealed the fact that he had lost his wedding ring in a loaf of bread from Grandma. We were the peaceful trio, and June began to summon us. Just gifts would do. We didn't require much disturbance. It wasn't intentional. I just felt like something was shifting inside of me, like a compass finally pointing north. So I enrolled in a part-time nursing assistant course at the local community college. No longer did I feel sacrificed for the sake of caring for Grandpa. Inheritance was the feeling. June walked into the kitchen one afternoon to find me buried in my dementia patient care assignment. "You know, I think you're always meant for this," she added, setting down a platter of cornbread. It was a no-go for me. I lose it too easily, I cry too easily, and I don't have the strength. She grinned. "You are here, though." My clinical rotation took place in a nearby memory care facility, and I made regular visits there. I was mostly unknown to the locals. They seemed to relax, though, as I read aloud, some of them drummed their fingers to the rhythm while I played Grandpa's beloved jazz station on his antique radio. Whenever I entered the store, one woman named Margie assumed I was her daughter. She was never corrected by me, as she repeated the same anecdote on her 1952 wedding day. I did nothing except listen. She was terrified that each recounting would pull a thread from the tapestry. Grandpa came to mind as a result. Feelings persisted, even as recollection waned. Still, he flinched at loud noises, smiled at birdsong, and grabbed for my hand. The idea that one's memory isn't always based on facts, but on feelings, is perhaps the portion that isn't taught in textbooks. Unexpectedly lucid, Grandpa turned to face me one day as I wheeled him into the backyard. "You're doing well, Lainey," he said with a smile. "Real good." I genuflected next to him. More would have been nice to do. With deliberate slowness, he shook his head. "You took action on the most important topic. Keep on." The photo we shot at the bus station, him, smiling, wrapped in my scarf, eyes closed, and the sun was printed that night. I set it down next to my bed, and it's not because he'd keep track. I would, though. This part of my story, which began as a rebellion and a period of suffering, has grown into something more. No way out. Returning home. There was complete quiet in the home the morning Grandpa went by. His hands were resting on an old blanket as I discovered him in his chair near the window. Soft jazz music was playing on the radio. The picture of his grandmother that he had framed remained on the table next to him. Looking as if he had just dozed off mid-story, he sat quietly with his eyes closed and jaw relaxed. At first I reined it in. "You may rest now," I whispered as I sat down next to him, grasped his hand. "What's left, I'll keep in mind for you." The oak tree beyond June's house was his favorite site, so we laid him to rest there. There were only a handful of neighbors, June and me, at the ceremony. My parents weren't left out because I was angry with them, please clarify. His last chapter did not include them. They weren't qualified to participate in its conclusion. I returned to Omaha, though a week after that. For my own sake, not theirs, I had to come back. I sent a ringing tone to the home where I was born and raised. After the curtains came down, it appeared smaller, like a stage. With startled eyes, Mom opened the door. "Hi, Alina." She appeared to be severely sleep-deprived. Arms crossed, Dad stood behind her. He wasn't rebellious, just exhausted. "I heard about your grandfather," she whispered. "Yes," was my response. "In the company of those who loved him," he went gently. Wringing her hands, she glanced downward. It was unintentional. Softly, I cut you off. You intended to abandon him at the airport, and if I hadn't gone along with your plan, you would have done the same to me. Dad moved to the front. The majority of the time, he forgot about you. No one took offense. I argued that it had never been about his recollection. It centered on the things I would never forget. I retrieved the envelope that June had given me the previous day from my luggage. A new will prepared by Grandpa. Hidden within is a serene letter, his pension, his life savings, and a note addressed to Eleanor. You remained the sole survivor. I adore you more than anyone else. Always keep in mind, dear Grandpa, it was silently given to them by me. There was a complex mix of shock, guilt, and other emotions on their faces. I declared that my intention was not to engage in a confrontation. My friend and I were both fine, and I wanted you to know that. As I turned to depart, Mum swiftly grasped my wrist. Are you going to return home, Alina? I stared deeply into her eyes and saw a woman whose life had revolved around control, suddenly standing in the middle of its void. What I perceived was not brutality, but emptiness. I let it be known that I am at home, held at Holton. I had to work for the respect of those who had previously remembered me. Once I got back to Kansas, I got back to studying, seeing patients, and sitting on the porch, where Grandpa used to sit. An elders and children's reading circle was one I established. Next to my nursing certificate, I displayed the photo of the two of us night after night. I held on tight while I murmured my prayers to the stars. I selected myself when I chose him, and that will suffice forever.